What's up guys, George T from The Wagon, and this week we're going to be doing some major upgrades on a 64 VW Baja. My friend James brought this in. This is his Baja buggy that he keeps up in Duck Creek, and he says he had a major leak issue, and then once I actually hit on the rack, I think I figured out what his major leak was. I think he's got two blown CV boots that were flinging the chromoly grease onto the engine, and the engine was melting it. You can see it on those fins right there, and it's just dripping down and making an absolute mess of that right there. So we're definitely going to fix both of those CV boots. I don't know if there's anything wrong with the engine. We have an Ace Racing engine that we're going to put into it, a 2332 with an FK7 cam that was built for his bus that we're going to throw in this instead, and he's already ordered another engine from Stefan. So we will be pulling this motor out of here. We're going to be cleaning off this pan, the skid plate. We're going to have to modify his cage because the other motor is dual carbureted. So we're going to have to eliminate that bar there and figure out another tie-in. We're going to be running this exhaust again, even though his current motor has an A1 Sidewinder on it. The A1 Sidewinder will not work with this cage. It's not beneficial in this vehicle, and that way we don't have to order another exhaust for his bus. We're going to clean up all this plumbing mess. This is ridiculous. This is literally plumbing. So we're going to do a lot of retrofitting. We're going to do a whole push-lock oil system. We're going to relocate things. So we're going to have to clean everything up and get that Ace Racing engine in here. Rule number one, pulling an engine, disconnect your battery. Type 1s, they'll be under your seat. Type 2s, they're in your engine compartment. Gears, it'll be in the engine compartment or potentially under the seat. Don't just do one, I do both, positive and negative. Get it free and clear. If you do not disconnect it, that will be a live wire that is connected to the back of the starter, and it's powered all the time. This week's scenario, we gotta get that motor out and get that motor in. This is a 1641, worked to death on this Baja. You gotta keep it pinned to go anywhere. And he has this up in the mountains, more of a trail one. I will be removing these generator belt, little tiny silly thing. You got a bigger fan back here trying to keep going, not on my watch. We gotta take that exhaust off. We're putting that tri-mill on it. Some of these tins will be being removed from it and not returning to it because there's no need for them on there since it's open air. This motor's gotta get pulled. I gotta label all the silly wiring to this. We're gonna clean up the wiring as well. It's gonna get relocated. We're gonna move this over here. Probably put a weld-on tab on the cage. That's so nuts. But you know, it worked. I mean, I talk smack on it, but this thing's been going for years. This is the Ace Racing engines. So we are gonna take this and put it in that Baja. This is a 2332 FK7 cam. So it'll be a nice little bottom end stump puller, which should be perfect for that thing up in the mountains. This is a super cool looking Baja, by the way. It's like that M&M green. I'm not sure what color it is, but it's super cool. It's got a cool light bar, rack, all these little accessory things here. It's just a good looking ride. The only thing it's lacking is power. We're hoping to change that with the Ace Racing engine. Motor is pulled. Don't look so bad in there. Good throwout bearing. It's a little bit of moisture in there, but this motor is not going back in. This is all CV grease. Most likely this is as well. I don't think that's wetness from the cooler as far as the leak goes because this motor still reads full of oil. So I'm going to say this majority of this wetness I'm seeing is related to the blown out CVs. I'm going to show you something that's kind of weird on that CV, because usually it's CV grease, and this is like become liquefied. Do you see that? It's like an oil leak, even though it's CV grease. Like it's been, I don't know if it's overworked and it's melted, or if there's potentially a leak, because this is driver's side and that was the inside, and I'm not seeing the same situation happening here. So I got to make sure that the cups on that transmission are not leaking gear oil into the actual CVs, which will degrade the CV grease itself. It'll thin it out. What we're gonna have to do is look at these cups here, because they have seals on them, and you see all that RTV on it. So somebody was obviously trying to stop something from coming through. So I'll have to look and see what seal goes there and if it can be fixed, because I think this is the problem with that CV grease looking like CV oil. We've got the exhaust removed from the original Baja engine. I'm going to be removing the A1 sidewinder from this front tin, the pulley set, and that back pulley tin. We're going to install it without any of the external tins on it. So when this motor arrived to me, it kind of shipped it in the pallet, so I know that I need to reseal the sump on it. That's here. So there's another thing I need to do this motor there. I got Ocean scrubbing the exhaust off from the CVs. The ruptured CVs here were just smearing grease everywhere, so I had Ocean pressure wash this whole thing out. Get it good and clean. Like, look at this, not dripping anymore. Looks good. We're gonna have to get these super clean. And apparently that's the fix. I was talking to another transmission guy, and he was saying, like, you just pack these full of RTV. That seems goofy to me, but we're gonna work with that. We'll do the same thing on this side. I gotta make a trip to SoCal Speed Shop because we're gonna completely redo oil lines. We've mapped out the oil system and we've mapped out the fuel system and bought all the fittings that we needed for that. I picked everything up here you see at SoCal Speed Shop in Las Vegas. Those guys have an excellent selection of fittings. Can't recommend them enough. So we are dressing this motor out, and as it came from Ace, we have the dash 6 fittings on here. So with that dash 6 fitting, we're gonna go straight and straight. Our hose will make the curve we need. We have a T fitting here that aims down towards here where our bulkhead's gonna come through. And that bulkhead's gonna have a 90-degree down here facing up, and then 3 straights here, 1 down, 1 left, 1 right. And that is what's going to make up our fuel system here. I find this kind of stuff funny in our industry. There's a CB Magnaspark and a CB Magnaspark mount for their specific coil. When I went to put a dash 8 fitting on this, it would not fit. That hits the dash 8 fitting. So now I have to use a standard barb fitting here and potentially still have to clearance the distributor. Both parts are made by the same people to be used in the same application. And if you're going to be using that breather, I guess you're not going to unless you actually modify parts. That's kind of that's in our industry. It drives me freaking insane. This is a specific mount for their coil to go with their distributor, and it does not allow for this to be used as a breather port without modifying one or the other. So we've got this. I'm basically going to have just a straight piece of tubing on this barb fitting with a clamp on it. I'd prefer to have a dash 8 and a fitting there, but this won't allow that to take place. We're going to come up to here on this side of the Berg breather box. We're going to put a 45 there coming off, and that's going to be my case vent. And this actually is the breather style. I've never run these before. I always run the one with the cap on it, like a standard oil fill. I use the factory fuel hole. This is where your factory fuel line would have come through to install my dash 6 bulkheads. When I do install this, I put the short side on the inside, because remember your tin, this tin here is right there, so you don't want that to interfere. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bump that up. You can see it almost fits. Heck, you could almost thread it in there, but just not enough. So we're gonna bump that up with a step bit, 1 size up. You can see it says it there, 9/16 is what we cut it open to. And now our bulkhead fitting fits into that. I'm gonna clean this mess up here. My deburring tool in that hole there. And we also have the nylon washers and the nut for this that we will Loctite in place. So we ground that washer with a flat side on it that follows that little break edge right there. We put Loctite on this. It's 2 21 millimeters that tighten up that XRP bulkhead. And we got that dude snugged in there, ready to accept our line on this side and on this side. The Loctite is important, guys, and also getting it really nice and tight. because you don't want to be putting this fitting on and then this turns and ruins everything you have on the other side. We've got our lines built now. Nothing is snugged up yet. They're all just kind of sitting here, ready to take apart if need be. We're going to go through and tighten them all up. And then coming off of here will be a -6. These are the vapor guards. I've used these in other videos in the past too. This allows me the 5/16 fuel line that we're going to have coming off the body. It allows it to go to an AN fitting, so the motor still has a quick release fuel fitting on it. I like this Aeromotive line. This will last a long time. This thing's going to Utah. It does not come into town but once every 2 or 3 years, so I know that this fuel line will last an extended period of time. We made our 45 degree come off that backside there, and I have it vented into the top of the case here. We're using the IMPI drop-in, and you see those match very nicely to the head size that we got. Our exhaust is slightly smaller than the A1 that came with this, but now it's going into a Baja. We will be putting that header on right now. We've dropped all 4 of our copper IMPI gaskets in. IMPI part number 003388, and they are 1.5 inch copper slip exhaust gaskets. This is a 1.5 inch tubing on this dude here, and you can see they actually match those heads beautifully. This is our first mock-up of putting that exhaust on. I do a cut there. I'm going to give that a little more clearance so I don't just keep bubbling that powder coat up. And as close as it is, I'm going to need that off in order to put that pulley back on. That's how she's going to look though. She should look pretty cool when it's in that Baja. We also have to do modifications on this cage right here. And this tube is going to get eliminated, but it's in the way of the dual carbs, and he didn't want to go to a single carb setup. So we're going to make it work with what we have. To avoid having all this plumbing you saw here, look at all them adapters to make the temp sensor work. To avoid that, what I did is I pulled the universal cap off. So this would have been for a type 3 oil fill. I pull it off, I drill and tap it for an 1/8 inch NPT. I reseal it, and you see at the base of it, it's installed with JB Weld on the actual fitting itself. So my temp sensor, it's connected to the engine. Ocean's going to drain the gearbox here, so we can clean these cups out and get them re-siliconed up. And while I was on my parts run, I had Ocean take apart the CVs. You see we kept them all labeled and separated. That's important when you're doing CVs. You want to make sure that you're putting everything back the way it was. So we got all our pieces all cleaned up. We're going to go through here. I'm going to wipe them all down with a fresh rag, and we're going to rebuild our CVs with our new boots on it. I picked up the new boots from Off-Road Buggy. So I picked up, these are Type 2 CVs. We picked up the Type 2 CV boots, and we picked up packs of grease for each, one for each end. So 4 packs of grease for those, all from Off-Road Buggy. Update on this engine. I made a new T-fitting for that in there. So we have our oil pressure gauge and our oil pressure switch there. Both of these are existing to what's in the car. That's why I wanted to reuse them, because there are custom gauges in there. We have our exhaust on. We've upgraded the belt to 11.3 by 912. We got an alternator belt on it. I've made bacon strips for it. They're being painted right now. The motor did not come with studs, so we've taken the studs off of his motor. I still have to do this side because I'm waiting for it to go down. We've put the larger sump on it because this is the sump that fits the cage, which fits the skid plate and everything else on it. So we took the IMPI thin line sump off of there, and we put this IMPI, I believe these are 2-quart sumps. They're a little bit deeper. His skid plate already has the opening for this small standard size sump plate. If we would have ran that IMPI thin line sump, it has the larger Mag X plate on it. We would have to modify his skid plate as well. I like this because of increased capacity. I did have to sweat that on because this was a 1-piece tube that was on that oil pickup tube there. On the sump, we have a Ross Wolf Viton gasket. I'm waiting for a Ross Wolf sump plate for this. We're going to eliminate those studs, get a Viton gasket, and the Viton O-ring bolts going on that with our magnetic plug that's going to go over that. Also, we did a 4-gauge alternator lead on this that we do in-house there. Don't forget grommets, guys. Grommet everything. We've put the ring on the back here. This came with no ring. We've got our fuel system all done on it. I think that's pretty much everything that we've done to the motor itself. On the car so far, we've removed the 2 bottom where the cage mounts to. Somebody tried to jack the car up from this one, so it's split and bent. So we pulled them both off, straightened them up, and we're going to do some cage sizing. We've got the CVs back in place, all rebuilt, all redone. New boots, new grease, everything in those is finished up. We're going to be removing this Morse cable, because we're going to go back to a throttle cable. We're going to be replacing this fuel line with actual real fuel line. This is some goofiness. These are type 2 flanges on those CVs. They're not type 1, so they're a little beefier. I see a heavy duty side plate on there. This thing is all solid mounted. So with a little bit more displacement, it should be pretty darn nice. Today, Yoshi and I are going to actually stab the motor in here. That's what we're getting ready to do now. I got to pull this off of here. We got to put the stud onto this side here, get it sized into the vehicle. Once we actually get it in the vehicle, then we got to start dry fitting the cage up there, or just taking measurements from this point here, this flange here, figure out where my carb is, and start cutting that tubing off of there and making mods on it. Motor is stabbed. This is the loom that used to go into the engine. I've relocated a couple things. That's in the same configuration, they fit, but I relocated this one here, which used to exist over here. So I would have had to extend this wire, and as you can see, it's been extended. A few of them have been extended once before, and I'm not a fan of that. So we are cutting it off here, and we're gonna put a weather pack plug there. So what I've done is I've made a loom for the engine in the matching colors that exist here already, and I've sized it to the engine. So this has been run through. I've terminated everything. We got our separate heat shrinks for all our different areas. Everything is cut to fit and lays in one space only. So we're gonna make a weather pack plug for this end here and get it plugged in over there. While the loom was run in here, I made a line on it, those black Sharpie marks you see right there, and that will bring me to this location here. So now I have a measurement to go off of, a relative space of where it should end up. Our plug should end up being in this area right here is what I'm trying to shoot for. I have plenty of excess on the loom I made coming out that way. So if I need to adjust, I can adjust accordingly on either end. We've made the weather pack plug male and female here. Our loom is made as well. We have each connection on the engine. So before I actually plug it into the other side of this cord, I'm going to check for continuity. I'm going to make sure that each connection has continuity all the way to this end over here. We have our voltmeter set to continuity. If anybody doesn't know, that's the symbol you're going to put on for continuity. Always test your connections. If I could take the two ends, you hear the continuity. So Ocean's going to be probing on the weather pack plug, and I'm going to be going to the actual connections here. All right, first wire we're going to is the blue wire. Okay, we got continuity there. Next one's going to be the green. Okay, green is good. Going to yellow. You on it?
Yep.
Yellow, we don't have continuity. Let me double check that. All right, so we got to figure out where we lost connection there. And now we're going to go to white. Okay, back to yellow. You son of a biscuit, would you get in there? Now we got it. Okay, so yellow's working as well. We have continuity in all of our wires. I got to stop by SoCal and get the metal zip ties that go on the end of these, but we did an exhaust wrap along here just because I'm not comfortable with how close this is to that manifold and basically the carburetor. We're not trying to cook the gas before it goes in. So we did a wrap on both sides in the titanium header wrap. All right, we have really flash forwarded since last time this camera was broke out. We were just trying to get stuff done. Cage is on. I welded on a mount for the oil filter itself. This was a little bit of a discussion between me and the owner of the car because he wanted it underneath there, and I said, well, there's nowhere to put it there since we have a cooler right here and hot exhaust here and articulating suspension there. I said that's a no-go. I didn't want to put it here on the inside of this cage because then it's just roasting like a peanut sitting here by all this exhaust. So I chose to put it here. His one concern was tires the tire throwing up rocks. And I totally understand that. So we made this bracket right here. Put that dude together. I'll put some pictures of how I did it. So we went from paper template, is what that was there, to metal, and I did have to weld a bottom on it just to make sure that that dude is protected. We made all of our oil lines in the interim. We have actually completed everything. Our wiring's done. We've actually fired this vehicle up at this point. We oiled the filters lightly with some K&N oil, and we put the outerwears on it since it is actually going to be an off-road vehicle. We've got our fuel line connected there. You can't see it because it's black in that abyss. And we've got all the oil lines done and our breather lines done. And just like my bus, I do not have the 3/4 side vented. If you see here, it's difficult to see because it's black, but I put a cap on that there. I just don't, you know, your motor rotates this way. This side seems to get full of oil, and even a lot of the race guys don't even vent that side anymore. So I got this side vented. We made that vent coming off the fuel pump block off over there. And we got all the gauges. Remember we made the loom earlier. We made a separate loom for this, the weather pack plug. And I made this for the coil setup because this is a keyed power for a relay, and the white wire is actually the coil wire coming from the front. So I made this setup here so it could be like when we pull the motor, that disconnects and this disconnects, make life easy. And we ran the throttle cable straight in. We did a little trick with the heat shrink. I bought a set of bike cable cutters because I work on bikes too, my own, no one else's. So I bought these dudes right here, and they're actually really slick. They cut that cable so clean. I mean, like perfect, no fraying, no nothing. So very happy about that because I used to cut them with my big cable cutters here. All right, so we have fired this up. It has not driven yet, and I'm not gonna fire it up right now because I just had to reseal my T-fitting over here. This top sensor was leaking on fire up, just a small little drip. But I'm trying to make this thing as dry as possible. Steph did such a nice job building this engine. I want to make sure it stays as nice and as pretty as it is. We're going to take it up. I'm going to show you the Ross Wolf sump plate that we put on it because we did end up changing that sump out. We have an empty sump on this one. This is the deeper empty sump. I believe these are a full 2 quarts. And then we put the Ross Wolf deep sump kit on it. So this has a Viton gasket in between case and sump, and in between sump plate and sump. This comes in the kit with the 2 gaskets. You get your Viton Allen bolts. You get the gold plug, drain plug in it that has the big magnet on it to hopefully catch anything that potentially go in that engine. I didn't want to use the CB sump this came with because not only is it less capacity, because it's a thin line, you know, initially this was going to go in a lowered bus. Now it's going to Baja, so we took the big sump off the Baja motor. And I would have also had to modify the skid plate for the larger Mag X plate, which that would have been simple enough, but I'm okay. I like this better. I like the fact we have more oil capacity. Oil capacity is everything on something that someone's going to keep pinned to the floor at all times. There's our cooler and everything up there. We had to remake all the lines, everything going to it, and you see everything we did has secure brackets holding it in place. Everything's like this where it would potentially rub up against. We have another layer of rubber in between. We have the silicone sheathing here. That way, if any of our zip ties break and this happens to touch exhaust, it's not going to burn through there. I did the same silicone sheathing here because it does physically touch the engine, and this is our cold line coming back in, so I don't want to potentially heat it up anymore. And that goes along here, back up over there. Once again, silicone sheathing here because we do have exhaust in play. Silicone sheathing on the breather as well for the same reason with that exhaust in play. We are going to get this dude to where it drives, and I'd say maybe in about I'll probably fire it up tomorrow on Saturday, see how that goes. But I'm really stoked how this thing came out. That was a nice little piece. I put 2 rib nuts into the cage there to mount it in there. Came out super slick. So that is the Baja swap of the Ace Racing engine. We are going to, James Pulley, the gentleman that owns this, has asked me to go through this. Look at those boots. That's why it wasn't running well. When you can move your manifold like that, that ain't right. So we're gonna change the boots on this. I know the motor's not blown because the oil we saw everywhere was from the CVs. His CVs had blown up completely. These cups right here don't seal very well. And when they do leak gear oil into your CV, it liquefies the moly grease in there. And once it flung it, I know why the owner thought it was oil. Because this whole tray was just soaking in oil. Everything around here was just sprayed in oil. You can see just a quick look right here on the back of that motor. I mean, I would think my motor blew too if I saw that. But we caught it, the fact that it was the CVs, and then we said it was running poorly, and I saw those, they weren't that bad, but after moving a couple times, they just disintegrated. But after seeing those, I knew that that was the issue of the no run. So we're gonna get this thing to where it runs again. I got an exhaust I'm gonna put outside. I'll take the CB sump, the replacement one that Steph sent me here. We're going to put this onto this engine here to where this thing is a running, driving engine again. That way, if the owner wants to put in another car, he can. We got the motor and everything done on that end of it. Took it for its first test drive, and this car was about as squirrely as it gets. So as I come over here, I'm gonna show you something. Do you see how much these arms are moving independent of that beam? It's not normal. It's not the way it should be. So we have an excess amount of play in those. And let's just look at what we got here. That's the wheel it's designed for, and that's the wheel it's running right now. Just the additional weight and rotating mass is going to put everything under a much greater strain than then what would have been their factory. So they've got the red bushings in here. We are going to switch them out with some Seiko Delrin bushings and basically do a very mild front end rebuild. It doesn't need everything done, but we're going to just try and get the deflection out of these arms. Because once you actually put the tire on here and you move it, that little bit of movement you see there turns out to be almost like, I'm going to say, a 1/4 inch of movement on the wheel. And you can move it in and out, like top to bottom this way. And these are just rocking and rolling with it. We're going to try and tighten this up. It'll make it much more stable. We just went from a 1641 single carb motor to a 2332 dual carb Ace Racing engine. So this has significantly more power than it had before. We need to make sure they can handle it up front, that this guy doesn't hurt himself in this car. I'm going to pull these arms, I'm going to see what we got in there, and we are going to head over to Butch's Speed Shop and try and get some bushings for this. So these are the common ones you buy. They're like polyurethane or something like that. Let's see, Prothane is the name of the company. These should be like a direct replacement for stock, and they're just worn out. So I got my bottom driver's side trailing arm off and the bushing for it. I've cleaned out the majority of the grease just so I can feel, and you can feel this rocks on there. Any deflection like that is going to be an issue as far as like when you start putting the leverage of the outer suspension, everything on it, especially with that big wheel he's got on this thing right now. So we're gonna look for something that indexes a little tighter onto that there. It shouldn't spin that freely, and I get it, or the suspension should articulate freely, but as free as that spinning right there, that's because we have deflection in between these two. And most likely a little bit here just because this urethane is compressed from time. So let's see what we can get over at Butch's. Just got back from Butch's. We got the Seiko bushings that I was looking for, and they were the only ones that were stepped like that, like the factory. So when you remove the needle bearings from a beam or a bushing, whatever it was, there's gonna be a step where the bearing or the bushing used to index into, and there's the only one I could find. These didn't even have it, the Prothanes that were in there. The only reason that it has that is because that indentation was made by the beam, because you can look at this side and see it's smooth, no ridge, and then that side, so this is where the weight was on it, was pressed up against it. So when I actually have it indexed into the beam, there's a little bit of a gap now here between this and the beam. As you can see where that used to be, it still lines up. The indexing hole still lines up. That is a really snug fit, still spins. Definitely does not rock like the other one, like the Prothane did. So I've got this one driven in. The trailing arm is indexed into the springs. And when I look down this hole, it's gonna be hard for you guys to see, but the divot in the springs actually lines up with the hole now, even though it looks like there's a gap there. And you can hear when you're trying to drive this in how it stops, like it makes a pinging noise, because this now is the ridge that I showed you in the bushing is now it's up against that ridge right there. What we're looking at there, that's actually a ridge in the beam that used to house the bearing in there. And that's what this is pressed up against. So we're not gonna be able to get that to drive any more in. And since our divot lines up, I think we're good to go. And I'll show you real quick, no more play. That arm indexes in there and stays in there nice and solid. Since we are adding different bushings, we will have to remeasure our trailing arm distance and reshim these spindles to be on the safe side. We've got both trailing arms in now. Both of our grub screws are indexed into the divot in the leaf pack that's already in there. They're connected. We still have movement, like you see how the trailing arm still goes up and down for articulation, but we don't have any movement this way. If you remember before, this was actually rocking in the beam. So this is going to give us a lot more stability. A Delrin bushing is supposed to be self-lubricating as far as this interior surface, but I am going to put some grease in here because this indexes over the springs, and we want to make sure that our springs don't get rotted or corroded. This thing does live up in Utah, so I want to make sure that we get a good amount of grease up in here, inside there, for the leaf pack. And it's for the preservation of said leaf pack that we're even putting the grease in there. So this is just going to slide over this. And Delrin is what they call self-lubricating. So that's what we're going for there. So this was pulled fresh from the beam just now. You can see that step is only grease. So the bushing I'm installing actually has a step in it. This one did not. We should get a much snugger fit. And even when it gets what we're called worn in, it shouldn't have the same deflection that this sucker had in it before. So we've got all four of these arms changed, and you can see there is zero deflection in those arms now. That's a big difference. We're gonna get this thing put back together. Somebody may be freaking out about that. It's a brass dead blow. It's designed for hitting steel and will not mar steel. I had to pull that back out. When you look through the hole where the pinch bolt goes in, and if you see the O-ring in there, you know you caught it. So what I did is I actually caught the O-ring, we had to pull it back out, replace the O-ring, and put it back in. And now I see I'm nice and clear, no O-ring in there. As you look through this hole, you see I got a clear shot, so the bolt will fall right in there. You can see our link pins are coming through now. Our link pin actually is slotted, so this accepts a wrench onto it so we can turn it. We're going to line up the pivot bolt here, the pinch bolt here. There's a groove, a worm groove in that link pin, and you're going to pull everything in tight as you turn this link pin in on the pinch bolt there. So I pressured on the bolt like I'm pushing it in, and then I'm moving this so it gets to a point where now I felt it go in. Any little fine tuning, boom, the bolt goes right in. I always prefer to put a flat washer, and when you're doing this, always replace out your lock washer. So once you actually get the bolt in there, you have your 14mm box end, and that is what will control the turn of this. Now this can go in and this can go out. So right now at this point we want to turn it inward, like to pull everything inward. And you can see right there, I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera, but you can see that pin start to pull in. And then it's going to pull the whole, now it's sandwiching these two areas together. And I give it a pretty decent amount of pressure, and I back off just a hair. Just like that, because we want it to still articulate. If you make it too tight, it won't be able to articulate. It'll stop it from spinning, and then you start destroying shims and everything in here. So once I set tension where I like it, so you saw that came out when I went that way. It's pulling in when I'm bringing this link pin upward. Go back just a hair. Right there. Right there should have very smooth articulation and suspension with no binding. It's going to be very difficult on this one also. That's a very aggressive angle these trailing arms are at, because this beam has such a severe raise to it. You know, notice here we got a gusset on the spindle for strength, and we got gussets on the trailing arms for strength, gusset on the tie rod connection for strength. This is definitely a former, I'm going to say, off-road racing vehicle that someone did, or they at least set it up to be raceable by making all these components much stronger. All right, we're going to get the other side shimmed up and get this thing tightened up, and then we can take it on some better test drives. When I took it on the first couple test drives, this thing was really squirrely, because I mean, you could move these suckers a good 1/4 of an inch, maybe even a 1/2 inch, the tires that were on it before. So by fixing the mess that we had here, and now re-shimming these and resetting them, re-greasing them, we should have a really nice smooth flowing front end. Ocean and I got this front end all done. We changed out the bushings on everything. We set up our bars and some string, and we did a front end alignment on this. And just the steering, the driving of it is 20 times better. It's not as squirrely. The car was very darty. I think when we initially measured it, it had 1 inch of toe out, meaning the wheels are doing this. And if you're familiar with that, if your car has toe out, this is what your car is trying to do the whole time. So that's where the dartiness comes from. The car is trying to just go off in separate directions. We've got it set up with an 1/8 inch of toe in right now, so I can let go of this thing while I'm driving. It stays nice and straight on the streets. Doesn't fight. It almost feels like it rolls better too, which it is. There's less resistance on it. So the front end's dialed in. We're going to look in on the driver's side. It's got a touch positive camber, and so we're going to look into that. Maybe I got the shim stack wrong, or maybe there's something going on with the spindle or trailing arm. Everything's working great in the rear so far. We've got our CVs are all rebuilt, doing well. We've got the Ace Racing engine installed on this dude. The one thing I don't like is we got this breather style one, and it emits your internal vapors of the engine, like that oil smell, and you actually smell it behind the wheel. And when I come out to like just check my carbs and all that stuff, you see like a misting around this. I'd assume that's going to go away as the rings break in and it gets all solid. But I always prefer the cap style, and then you can run one line over to your air cleaner for that evacuation. But that's neither here nor there. CB ignition's doing well. We've got the owner's previous exhaust on it, and I'm hearing the exhaust when I'm driving, and the weird thing is I get out and I don't hear it. So I'll have to figure that out, see what's going on there. We got our oil lines made. We've got our filter mounted and the bracket we made to protect the filter itself. All that's doing well. No rattling, no nothing like that on it. There's a beautiful Baja. The owner picked it up for a song, and he's put a little bit of money into it, but it's well worth it. We went from a 1641 to a 2332. So the power increase is pretty significant. The only thing is, when you're pushing freaking big dogs like these, you lose a lot of your power just getting going. You know, these are some giant tires compared to original. You saw that comparison when I was talking about how much stress the front end is under. But the thing drives beautifully. We're going to do a couple more shakedown runs. I'm having one problem that I'm having right now is getting the carbs to hit at the same time. My left one's leading, and it's just by a hair, so I'm going to mess with this side a little bit more, get her dialed in. But I'm very happy with the work we got going on so far. All right, we're gonna do another round of test drives. I got the carb hit a little closer. You know, the Berg linkage sometimes takes a little bit of fiddling with to get it dialed in, but once it's dialed in, it's the best dang linkage you'll ever own. Much nicer response on takeoff. Crazy, I hear an exhaust leak inside here. When I get out, I don't hear a dang thing. This car rips. She ain't gonna win a drag race, but she's definitely faster than she was before with the little 1600. The beauty of that FK7 cam, this is basically the same motor I have in my bus. 2332 with an FK7 cam in it, 1:4 ratio rockers on it. But it can be powerful and it can be docile, which is really nice. God, the steering is so much better. Before it was an absolute handful to drive this thing down the street. Speaking of handfuls, Dunkel Supercharger video, one of my more popular videos. We are going to be swapping the beam on that. He has got 6 degrees of positive caster, I think it is. That's what they said, the alignment shop. So we're gonna swap out the beam in that one, because that thing gets above 45 miles an hour and it's a death trap. We don't want that. We want to be able to drive that thing. I'm very curious to take that supercharger on a distance drive to see how it does. We can't do that right now because we can't maintain 45 miles an hour without the white knuckle death grip on that steering wheel. And I don't want to do that. That's just cruising. This thing really should have a tack on it. Speedo doesn't work at all. It's not connected to anything. None of the dummy lights work. We got our 2 dummy lights right here instead. No turn indicator, although the turn signals do work. You know, this is probably a early 2000s build, I'd say, or a late 90s build. Super clean car. It definitely turns heads. I mean, I have had 3 people videotaping me in my first test drive, taking pictures of it. This freaking M&M green is loud. It's dope though. This car also has forward disc brakes. I cannot recommend that enough. When you're gonna oversize your tires, you're gonna add engines, upgrade the brakes too. To me, it's a necessary evil. I'd rather have 4-wheel impy disc brakes than factory drum brakes. I'll tell you that right now. Especially on something with tires this big. he's gonna have fun with this thing up in the mountains.